The fluorescent lights flickered lazily above the aisles of the quiet convenience store, casting a sterile glow over the shelves stocked with snacks and household essentials. The air was heavy with the faint smell of stale coffee and cleaning solution, a subtle reminder that this place had seen more late nights than early mornings. At exactly 4:17 p.m., a moment that would forever change the lives of two men unfolded. Marcus Blake, a black man in his late 40s, wore his years with quiet dignity. His military haircut was sharp, his posture straight, and his eyes carried a hardened calm, the kind only earned in war zones far from the comfort of suburban America. He stood near the checkout counter, his hand resting on a small bottle of water, when a voice shattered the fragile peace. "Hey, what do you think you're doing?" The voice was sharp, accusing, coming from Greg Marshall, the store manager. His face was flushed with suspicion, eyes narrowing as he pointed an accusing finger at Marcus. Greg was in his early 30s, a man molded by a small town where suspicion often replaced understanding. Marcus's calm demeanor did not falter. "I'm just buying this water," he said evenly, raising the bottle slightly to prove his point. Greg wasn't convinced. "We saw you put something in your pocket. Shoplifting's a serious offense." Marcus blinked in disbelief, the words slicing deeper than any bullet wound ever could. "I don't know what you're talking about." The assistant cashier, a young white man named Tyler, shifted uncomfortably behind the register. He glanced from Marcus to Greg, sensing the rising tension but unsure how to defuse it. "This is ridiculous," Marcus said, his voice steady but carrying an edge of pain. "You're accusing me without proof because of the color of my skin." Greg's eyes flickered with something between guilt and stubbornness. "I'm just doing my job." Outside the store's large front window, a boy played on his bicycle, oblivious to the storm brewing inside. Marcus's mind flashed back to a dusty battlefield in Iraq, the scorching sun beating down as bullets whizzed past. He remembered the desperate moment he risked everything to pull a wounded white soldier to safety, his brother by fate, though not by blood. That soldier had been Greg's brother, James. Yet here, in this quiet suburban store, that bond was invisible. The confrontation escalated quickly. Greg called security. Marcus was asked to wait while cameras were reviewed. The atmosphere grew heavier, more suffocating, as the store emptied around them. Tyler, unable to bear the injustice, quietly approached Marcus. "I'm sorry, sir. This isn't right." Marcus gave a faint smile, tired but grateful. "Thank you, kid." When the footage was finally played, it showed Marcus placing the bottle on the counter and nothing else. Greg's face drained of color as realization dawned. "Two didn't know," Greg stammered. Marcus looked at him, the hurt still evident but mingled now with a glimmer of hope. "You saved my brother's life once. Maybe now you can start to see me as more than just a suspect." Greg nodded slowly, the walls of prejudice beginning to crumble. Outside, the late afternoon sun cast long shadows, but inside that small store, something brighter began to grow: understanding. Marcus Blake sat stiffly on the plastic chair in the dim back office of the convenience store. The faint hum of the security monitor was the only sound breaking the thick silence. He stared at the bottle of water in his hands, the very same one Greg Marshall had accused him of stealing just hours ago. The bitter taste of humiliation lingered longer than the cool water could wash away. Tyler, the young cashier, stood just outside the door, his face clouded with unease. He wanted to do something, anything, but the fear of crossing his manager left him frozen. Yet, his eyes betrayed his conscientious, silent apology to Marcus for the injustice unfolding under his watch. After what felt like an eternity, the door creaked open. Greg Marshall stepped inside, his usually confident demeanor replaced by a look of awkward regret. His eyes searched Marcus's, hoping for a thread of forgiveness. "Marcus, two was wrong," Greg said, voice uneven. "I didn't see you for who you really are." Marcus's gaze held steady. "Then what did you see?" Greg sighed deeply and took a hesitant seat across from him. "A black man. Someone who looked suspicious to me. But that was my mistake, a terrible one." Marcus felt a familiar weight settle in his chest, not of anger, but exhaustion. "Out there, in the war, I was a soldier. I saved lives, including your brother's. But here, I'm just a suspect." Greg nodded slowly, the walls of his prejudice crumbling. "I can't change what I thought, but I want to change how I act." The next morning, Greg invited Marcus to a small cafe just around the corner from the store. Sunlight streamed softly through the windows, casting warm patches across their table, a stark contrast to the coldness that had filled the store the day before. "Tell me about that day," Greg said earnestly, stirring his coffee. "The day you saved James." Marcus leaned back, his eyes distant as he recalled the dusty battlefield in Iraq. It was chaos, explosions everywhere. We were ambushed, pinned down by gunfire. James was hit badly. I remember the heat of the sun, the weight of fear, and the sound of his voice calling out. He paused, then continued. I risked everything to drag him out of harm's way. Every second counted. Greg's face softened, lips trembling. He never stopped talking about you after that. Said you were a brother to him. Marcus smiled faintly. War turns strangers into family. Greg's eyes dropped to the table. I was blind. I judged you without knowing a thing. I'm sorry for that. Apologies are a start, Marcus said quietly. But understanding is better. Days turned into weeks, and a fragile but meaningful bond began to form between the two men. Greg invited Marcus to meet James, who was slowly recovering from his wounds. The reunion was quiet but powerful. James, still fragile but glowing with gratitude, reached out and shook Marcus's hand firmly. You saved my life. More than a debt, your family. Marcus nodded, feeling a warmth that had been absent for too long. We're more alike than people realize. Over dinner at James's home, stories of war, sacrifice, and survival wove a tapestry of shared humanity. The conversation turned to the bigger picture: how easily society could overlook those who fought and suffered because of skin color. Greg listened intently, the weight of his own biases pressing down on him like never before. At the convenience store, Greg took a bold step. He arranged a training session for all employees on racial bias and inclusion. Marcus was invited as a guest speaker, tasked with sharing his story to open hearts and minds. The day of the session, Marcus stood before a small crowd of skeptical faces. But as he spoke about his military service, about the sting of false accusations, and about the possibility of change, eyes softened. Hearts opened. A young cashier wiped tears silently. I never thought about how my assumptions could hurt someone like that. Greg stood quietly at the back, pride and humility mixing in his expression. Months later, Marcus received an invitation to a citywide ceremony honoring veterans. Never in his life had he imagined walking onto a stage to receive recognition from people who once doubted him. That day, standing in front of a crowded auditorium, Marcus's voice was steady but full of emotion. War is more than battles fought with guns. It is also a fight against fear, ignorance, and hatred within ourselves. I stand here not only for what I did on foreign soil, but for the chance to be seen as a human being in my own country. Applause erupted, filling the room with energy and hope. Among the crowd, Greg, James, and even Tyler stood in solidarity. Outside the convenience store one evening, Marcus looked up at the sky. The setting sun painted the horizon in shades of orange and purpley, a quiet reminder that even after darkness, light returns. He smiled to himself, knowing that the road ahead remained long and difficult, but believing firmly that change was possible. Because sometimes, the greatest battles are won not on distant fields of war, but in the hearts and minds of those willing to see beyond color and past mistakes. Marcus walked out of the cafe into the crisp morning air, the city slowly waking around him. The conversation with Greg had stirred something in him, not just frustration or pain, but a cautious hope. For the first time in a long while, he felt the possibility of healing. Returning to the convenience store that afternoon was like stepping back into a battlefield of a different kind. The fluorescent lights buzzed overhead, and the faint scent of coffee mingled with the usual retail odors. But the atmosphere inside felt charged, quieter than usual, as if the walls themselves were waiting. Greg met Marcus by the entrance, his eyes softer than before. Thanks for coming, Greg said, his voice low but genuine. Marcus nodded. I want to help change things here, Greg. Not just for me, but for everyone who's been judged unfairly. Greg smiled, a flicker of relief crossing his features. I want that too. That evening, the store was unusually busy. Customers flowed in and out, the hum of conversation filling the space. Marcus stood near the front, observing quietly as Greg and Tyler worked behind the counter. At one point, a teenage boy in a hoodie browsed the aisles nervously, glancing over his shoulder repeatedly. Marcus noticed the boy's hesitation, a silent echo of the suspicion he himself had faced. He stepped forward gently. "Hey, you okay?" The boy jumped slightly, then relaxed when he recognized the calm in Marcus's voice. "Yeah, just waiting for my mom." Marcus nodded. "I get it. People can be quick to judge." The boy looked up at him, eyes wide. "You really think so?" Marcus smiled softly. "I know so." Weeks later, the store hosted its first formal racial bias training session, led by Marcus himself. The small meeting room was packed with employees from all shifts, some skeptical, others curious. Marcus shared his story of the battlefield in Iraq, the day he saved James's life, and the painful moment he was accused of shoplifting because of his skin color. "There's more to us than meets the eye," Marcus said, "and it's time we start seeing each other as human beings first." Hands slowly raised, questions poured in. Conversation sparked. Walls began to crumble. Tyler, now a close ally, stood beside Marcus, beaming with pride. Greg sat in the front row, visibly moved. Outside the store that night, Marcus looked up at the stars, the cool breeze wrapping around him like a balm. He pulled his jacket tighter and whispered, "This is just the beginning." Behind him, the door opened, and Greg stepped out. "Mind if I join you?" Greg asked. Marcus nodded. "I don't mind." Together, they stood silently. Two men once divided by suspicion, but now united by understanding. The community started to take notice. News outlets picked up the story of the store manager and the veteran, a tale of prejudice overcome by courage and empathy. Marcus was invited to speak at local schools, sharing his journey to inspire younger generations. One day, during a talk at a high school, a student asked, "How do you forgive people who judge you so harshly?" Marcus looked out at the sea of young faces and answered, "Forgiveness doesn't mean forgetting. It means freeing yourself from the pain and choosing hope instead." Back at the convenience store, the atmosphere transformed. Customers from diverse backgrounds felt welcome. The employees worked with renewed respect and camaraderie. Greg approached Marcus one afternoon, holding a small box. "I wanted to give you this," Greg said, handing it over. Marcus opened it to find a military challenge coin, engraved with the words, "Brotherhood Beyond Battle." "I want you to know you're not alone anymore," Greg said. Marcus's eyes glistened with emotion. "Thank you." Months later, the city honored Marcus at a veterans ceremony. Standing on stage, bathed in spotlight, Marcus's voice resonated through the hall. "This award isn't just mine," he said. "It belongs to every person fighting their own battles against injustice." The crowd erupted in applause. Among them were Greg, James, and Tyler, faces that had become family. Walking out into the evening air, Marcus felt a deep peace. He looked up at the sky, a canvas of stars stretched above. The journey had been long and painful, but it had led to something greater: understanding, respect, and hope. Because sometimes, the greatest victories aren't won on the battlefield, but in the courage to change hearts. Months had passed since the night Marcus was wrongfully accused in that convenience store. The incident that could have shattered him had instead become a catalyst for transformation, not only for Marcus, but for an entire community. It was a late summer afternoon, the kind where the sunlight dipped low and golden, filtering through the leaves of the oak trees that lined the quiet suburban street. Marcus stood outside the same store where everything had begun, his broad shoulders relaxed, the tension of that day long lifted from his body. Greg Marshall approached him, carrying 2 cups of coffee. "Thought you might want a refill," Greg said, handing one to Marcus. "Thanks," Marcus replied, accepting the cup with a faint smile. They stood there in companionable silence, 2 men from very different worlds who had found common ground in the most unlikely way. "It's hard to believe how much has changed," Greg said, swirling the coffee in his cup. Marcus nodded. "Not just here. In my heart, too." Greg cleared his throat. "I've been thinking a lot about that day. When I accused you, I realize now it wasn't just about suspicion. It was fear. Fear of what I didn't understand." Marcus looked at him thoughtfully. "Fear can make people do things they wouldn't otherwise, but we're capable of overcoming it." Greg smiled. "I want to keep learning, to do better, for the store, for the community, and for myself." Their conversation was interrupted by the arrival of Tyler, who approached with a stack of flyers. "Hey, Marcus, Greg. The community center asked if you'd both like to join a panel discussion on racial justice and veterans issues." Marcus glanced at Greg. Sounds like an opportunity. Greg's eyes lit up. Definitely. That evening, the panel discussion was held in a modest auditorium filled with a diverse crowd, young and old, veterans and civilians, people of all backgrounds united by a desire to listen and learn. Marcus shared his story with raw honesty. The battlefield camaraderie that transcended race, the sting of false accusations back home, and the journey toward forgiveness and understanding. Greg spoke about confronting his own biases, the lessons learned from Marcus's courage, and the responsibility we all share to challenge injustice. Tyler added his youthful perspective, confessing how the experience had shattered many of his own preconceived notions. Questions flowed freely from the audience. Some were difficult, some hopeful, but all engaged. One elderly woman rose to her feet. Thank you for your bravery. Your story reminds us that change begins with conversation and courage. The applause that followed was warm and sustained. Weeks later, Marcus found himself walking through the local park, the soft rustle of leaves overhead, children's laughter echoing nearby. It was a peaceful place, but beneath its calm surface lay the scars of a city grappling with inequality. He paused by a bench and noticed a young man sitting alone, shoulders slumped, face troubled. Marcus approached gently. Hey, you all right? The young man looked up, eyes wary. Just trying to figure things out. Marcus nodded. I've been there. Sometimes the world makes it hard to believe there's hope. They talked about hardship, resilience, and the power of human connection. Marcus shared how he had found strength not only in battle, but in forgiveness and community. As the sun dipped lower, the young man's eyes brightened. Thank you. I needed to hear that. Marcus smiled. We all do. At the convenience store, a new tradition had taken root. Each year on the anniversary of that fateful day, Greg and Marcus hosted an event celebrating diversity and unity. Employees and customers gathered, sharing stories, food, and music that reflected the rich tapestry of their community. This year, the store's bulletin board was filled with photos of veterans, activists, and everyday heroes. The banner overhead read, "Together we stand, breaking barriers, building bridges." Marcus watched as children painted signs with messages of hope and equality. Greg handed out food to neighbors. Tyler led a group in a song about peace. The store had become more than a place to shop. It was a symbolic beacon of what was possible when people chose understanding over fear. One evening, as Marcus closed up the store with Greg and Tyler, a familiar figure approached. James, Greg's brother, now fully recovered and active in veteran support groups, smiled warmly. It's good to see you, Marcus, James said, clasping Marcus's hand firmly. You saved more than my life. You helped save my family. Marcus shook his head, humbled. We saved each other. Greg joined them, his eyes shining. I'm proud of the men you are. Proud of the change we've made together. They stood in the fading light, a circle of friendship forged in fire and tempered with grace. As the city moved forward, the ripples of Marcus's story continued to spread through classrooms, courtrooms, and community halls. It inspired conversations about racial justice, veteran care, and the human cost of prejudice. Marcus remained a steadfast voice for those too often unheard. His life was a testament to the power of courage not just on the battlefield, but in the quiet moments when choosing to be seen, to forgive, and to hope. One night, sitting on his porch under the stars, Marcus reflected on the journey, the pain, the triumphs, the bridges built. He whispered into the night, "We are more alike than different." And that is the truth worth fighting for. Thank you for listening. If you find it interesting, please like and subscribe to follow the next stories.